Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host, with my sidekick Beatrice. So today B and I are stopped, what's the name of this place, B? Yeah, Charleston, Tennessee. We're at the Loves. Charleston is an interesting place. It's a small town, not even 1,000 people, but a lot of history has happened here, as it turns out. During the Civil War, this area, because we're about, just to kind of give you an idea, we're right off I-75. We're like 30 miles north of Chattanooga, right? And while the 24 corridor saw lots and lots of action, in the western area of the Civil War, this area is pretty highly contested, but also served as kind of a stopping point for a lot of well-known general officers, including William Tecumseh Sherman and Oliver O. Howard, who was he was the guy whose corps got rolled up by Lee at Chancellorsville because they didn't have their pickets out right. And I think also Simon Bolivar Buckner spent time in this a residence here in town. But even before that, this place was known as kind of this, I guess, jumping off point for the Trail of Tears. So in the mid 1830s, and this is about 5 years after the Indian Removal Act was passed and became law in 1830, there was a treaty between the Cherokee and the U.S. government. And all the Cherokee were basically interned. Sorry, they weren't buried, although some of them were, in like these concentration camps in and around Charleston. And there was an army post here, and the army was in charge of it. And the Cherokee were treated, as prisoners. And that was in preparation for the westward migration of the Cherokee, which would become known as the Trail of Tears. And that kind of dovetails with what we were talking about yesterday about remember the raisin, right? This idea that, we got a problem and it's the natives. And of course, again, and by the way, the Indian Removal Act was just to get all natives out of the area east of the Mississippi. Obviously, we know what happened beyond that, later in the 19th century. So anyway, that's another thing that happened here. But also, Charleston is the first city in incorporated jurisdiction in Tennessee to have both a black mayor and a black chief of police, which is interesting, especially because only about a quarter of the population of the town is African American. So it seems like either African Americans vote in huge numbers compared to the white people in town, or there's some comedy amongst different races here. Regardless, it's an interesting fact. So yesterday I did a video about how companies treat truck drivers or potential truck drivers on their payroll with kind of a level of disrespect that I think shouldn't exist. And I got several comments about that, and one of the comments I got was asking a question, because I had mentioned TMC, about ESOPs, or what are called employee stock ownership plans. Now, lots of companies have these, and that again is this recruiting point, if you will. TMC has it, J&R Shugel has it, Paschal Trucking has it, because I see it on their trucks. What's a Big G? I think that's what it's called. They're a Tennessee-based company. They have it. And, you know, all these companies that have them, and there are lots of them in the trucking industry, they all say, you know, why work for a company when you can own it? Well, you know, that's just ridiculous. You know, it's like saying that somebody who resides in Green Bay, Wisconsin, owns the Green Bay Packers because it has a public charter that's kept, you know, in an American Legion post, right? Because the city did basically sponsor the team. You know, that's just bullcrap. It'd be like, you know, because here's the thing. Here's what ownership implies, right? When you say somebody's the owner, you're basically saying that they have some control. And, you know, it's like I own stock in some companies through mutual funds. I own equity in the company, but that doesn't mean I control anything. And it's the same thing with these ESOPs. Drivers don't control jack. But here's the reason that a lot of these companies, all of which are privately held, have done ESOPs. It's kind of a sleight of hand, right? What happens is you have a family like the Schugels or the people that own TMC or some of these other companies. And what they do is they say, well, we built this company and we've made lots of money off it, basically off our employees, and we want to get even wealthier and cash out. So if things go south or if things catch up to us, we're not left as the family that owns the company holding the bag. And so what they do, it's not unlike when private equity comes in and takes over a company and takes it from a public company to a private company. And what happens in these transactions is that the owners of the company, the people that control it and hold all the equity in the company, they create this ESOP. And the ESOP is a legal corporate entity. And what they then do is they sell the company to the ESOP. But in order for an ESOP that has zero money to buy a trucking company that is valued at 200 million, and guess who gets to value it, right? Like this is totally, there's total conflicts of interest here, but whatever. So it's valued at 200 million. So what happens is the ESOP goes out and borrows a butt ton of money. Now they might not borrow 200 million. They might only borrow like 100 million, right? And then have what is called an earnout with the controlling group of people. But those controlling group of people still get 100 million up front, right? Now it doesn't matter if an independent auditor would have valued the company at 125 million. 200 million is the purchase price, right? And the ESOP buys it, right? It's not like the ESOP shopped around for a good deal. They just buy the company, right? Because that's how this whole transaction is structured. Well, then what they do is they then have this profit sharing regime with their employees. But here's the thing about this, and I want to you know, make it very clear about profit sharing. Companies don't have to profit share with their employees. However, when you think about a trucking company, they're the only people that are profit centers, and I'm going to tell you there is an exception to this, but the only people that are profit centers in the company, in other words, the only people making money for the company, are the truck drivers. Now, some companies make money on brokerage, they make money reselling trucks, like Prime has pedigree, Prime has brokerage, you know. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of any trucking company's revenue comes from drivers. Whether it's independent contractors, company drivers, combination of both, whatever it is, right? And so what I noticed, for example, at Schugel, because that's the only place that I've been that had an ESOP, is there seemed to be, and I think this is happening at other places too, there seemed to be a concerted effort among the back office people, like whether it's payroll, maintenance, safety, the driver managers, etc., to shortchange drivers wherever they could. Schugel routinely cheated drivers on bonuses because they routinely cheated them on miles, like every trip. I'm talking every trip, and I ask around, like drivers I didn't know, I'd be like, hey, do you get all the miles you should, like per trip? And they're like, no. I said, do you get a bonus? They're like, maybe once in a while, even though it's supposed to be like a monthly bonus, right? So what I realized is that the company and these people that were long-standing local people that were probably, known to the Schugel family up in New Ulm, Minnesota, they were using truck drivers to enrich themselves for their own retirement, because the vesting schedule was like 6 years. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing, it's wholly discretionary. Okay, the difference between an ESOP and a 401k is a 401k, there's a plan agreement, and the company will face severe penalties for breaching that agreement. And you know exactly what you're getting. Because if the company said, like when I was at GP Transco, the company's policy was they would put in 4% match for the first 5% of your pay that you put in. So if 5% of my pay on a given payday was $500, right? I'm not saying it was, but let's say it was. It was $500. They would have, on the same payday, put in $400. Okay? But once they put that money in that 401k, it was mine. I mean, given the conditions that I have to meet for that 401k, right? But it also is not discretionary. If I put in 5%, they don't have a choice. They must put the 4% in. But these companies where they control everything and they're like, oh, guess what? Our profit pool is this much. Well, that profit pool is after they pay the executives butt tons of money, and those executives are getting, and many of the people in the company are getting bonuses before the profit is declared, right? Because bonuses are just other compensation, right? So after all the compensation, after all the bonuses, then they're like, oh, hey, guess what? We got this much money to give away. Well, if you only had, 2 years with the company, you might be getting, a couple $100. Meanwhile, there's some person that also gets the same amount of money, and they're sleeping in their bed every night, and they're not even that good at their job, right? So and they're fully vested, right? So I don't think ESOPs are anything that a driver should go, oh, that's really great, because it's totally discretionary, right? If you're, and it's just like these bonuses, right? When I was recruited by Schugel, they said, hey, we're going to pay you a $15,000 bonus. We're going to pay you $500 a month over 30 months. I'm like, okay, cool. That's fine. That'll augment my income. What they didn't tell me, and what I didn't know until I got to orientation, was I had to hit a certain number of dispatched miles in a month to qualify for that $500 bonus. And guess what? I came up short, painfully short, so many months. And you know what else? Lots of drivers had the same exact thing happen to them, right? They would cheat us out of miles. and then cheat us out of the bonus because they were able to cheat us out of miles. That's why I didn't stay there very long. But I'm suspicious of almost all of these. Unless I personally got to see all the documents and everything, I'm suspicious. And I also think that, like in Shugel's case, they bought a company that was controlled by private equity, Super Service. And I remember my chucklehead freaking, DM going, I'm like, why did they buy Super Service? Oh, they got it for pennies on the dollar. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? You guys are so dumb. Or they were up to no good. One of the two. They were either really morons when they bought that, or they were up to no good. Because private equity sucks the life out of any company. And if private equity said the company was worth 10 cents and you paid 2 cents, I guarantee that it was really only worth a penny, right? You paid twice as much as it was worth. And companies that do that, they're just questionable. They're just questionable. So anyway, that's my rant on ESOPs. So I came across this article, and I want to talk about it real quick, because this is almost like, I don't want to be too pejorative, but this is almost like truckers saying stupid shit in the media, okay? And who should know better. So I found this on overdriveonline.com, and it's an article about the FMCSA driver advisory board, okay? And it's a rather lengthy article, and I'll put a link to it in the description section. But something really jumped out at me, and the premise of the article was this op-ed that was written by the Secretary of Transportation and the Secretary of Labor. They wrote this joint op-ed, and they talked about shortages in the trucking industry, and they focused on the idea that part of the reason there are shortages is because the trucking industry has a retention problem, which was news to me, right? Like, I didn't know that companies like US Express have a 108% turnover ratio. I mean, who would have thought it? Anyway, these two cabinet officials in the Biden administration had this epiphany about retention in the trucking industry. But excuse me. But it goes on to talk about, what things could be done to keep drivers in the seat. What could improve retention. And, there were lots of ideas, and, one of the things, there might actually be a federal mandate for detention. I don't know what it's going to look like, but it might standardize all detention. And I'm sure there'll be some regime that's put together, and I think companies will want, a lot of trucking companies will want that regulation, that law, because then they don't have to fight so hard to get detention, and they can still participate in getting part of it. So it's like, it's going to generate revenue for them. And then it would also pay drivers more, or not. Because if you're a driver that has to fight for every dime of detention, it probably would be better for you. But if you're a driver, like when I was at GP Transco, they didn't even make you do much. They would just be like, oh yeah, we saw you were at this shipper for 4 hours, here's some money, right? So anyway, one quote though, because they interviewed several people that either own small trucking companies or are independent contractors, and they had some quotes in there from this woman. She's a truck driver, and she's independent, and sorry about the glare. And her name is Debbie Desderato. I hope I'm saying that right. It's Desiderato. And Debbie was quoted, she's been driving for many years, right? And one of the things that she said was, all these regulations and motor transport police or motor carrier, commercial vehicle enforcement, they're just all over us like a bad suit, which I actually don't agree with. I mean, I've had one level 1. I've been pulled over for a level 3 one time. The level 1 was when I was bobtail at a going through a way station. I just don't see it. I just don't see that there's this heavy-handedness because there's so many trucks on the road. I go through way stations and that's enforcement, but I just don't see it. But anyway, she said a truck driver with 4 million miles accident-free, and then that's a quote, a truck driver with 4 million miles accident-free, end quote. And then it says, should be granted leeway to operate with relaxed hours or other restrictions. Now that's poorly written, and that's not a direct quote, but it's in between 2 other quotes of hers, so I'm sure that there was some discussion with the reporter. But basically the idea was, if you have 4 million miles, if you're like some senior trucker, right, you're some super experienced super trucker, you should have a different set of rules. Like there should be different laws for you. Well, the fact that that's even in an article as some serious thing, and she's on this driver board, right, that's advising the feds. The idea that any truck driver or any American would go, hey, I've been doing something longer, so I think that I should get a different set of rules. That's preposterous. It's just absurd that anybody would even think that way. Why? Because any truck driver is only as good as the last mile they drove, right? There's no past is not prologue in trucking. You could have 1 million, 2 million safe miles, and guess what? You go over that bridge in Wisconsin in October and you aren't paying attention and there's frost on it, and next thing you know, you're down a ravine. Guess who doesn't have 2 million accident-free miles anymore? You don't. You got 0 accident-free miles, okay? That's the nature of this business, okay? You could have 4 million miles and be the next guy that gets his name in the paper because you killed a busload of kids. It happens, okay? It happens. Like there was a trucker killed in Fort Worth last winter. He didn't have a seatbelt on. He came up on slow traffic. He couldn't stop his truck and he went right off a bridge, right? He didn't even have his seatbelt on. I don't care if the guy had 2 hours of experience, right? He clearly wasn't obeying the rules and was driving too fast for the conditions. But you know what I bet? I bet he had a lot more experience than 2 hours. And I bet he had a lot more experience than a lot of truckers who would be wearing a seatbelt and would have stopped their truck without a collision. So, this idea that there's too much regulations exist because people couldn't obey the rules that were in place before, or because there was some, disaster. I admit that the hours of service stuff makes me crazy. I've already mentioned in a video about simplifying it. Just say, hey, you get to drive for 12 hours a day, period. We don't care if it's yard move, we don't care what it is. If the truck's moving, you're driving, right? There's no PC, there's no nothing. It's just drive or off duty, right? If your truck's stopped, you're off duty, right? Like, who cares that you're walking a set of papers in? Like, this on duty, I already did a video on it. I just think we need to simplify it. 12 hours, you get to drive for 12 hours. If that takes you 16 hours, so what? Because so what if you were sleeping for 2 hours or playing Donkey Kong, for 2 hours? Who cares, right? Driving is what fatigues you. It's not sitting around surfing the web. It's not shooting the bull with other truckers. It's not being in the truck stop, getting you know, a hot dog off the roller grill. It's the actual driving that fatigues you. That's why by the way, that's why they changed the rule on the half-an-hour break. You can be on duty. It's obviously not on duty that fatigues you, right? Because they let you be on duty now. Or you could be yard moving. You could be driving your truck around at 17 miles an hour, and that's your break. That's ridiculous. Anyway, I just think, you know, truckers need to stop shooting themselves in the foot with stuff like, oh, make a different set of rules. Like, it's so arbitrary, you know? And also, I'll say this about somebody that's got 4 million accident-free miles. They're one lucky SOB because, you know, everybody has a bad day. And when I say accident-free, I mean, that means you never scraped somebody else's trailer at a pitch black drop yard, right? That's an accident. You know, you never ran over a curb and popped a tire, because that's an accident. Yeah, every trucking company thinks it is. It might not be on your CSA score, but it's an accident. So I don't even want to hear it. So, Debbie, love you, much success to you, but that's just a stupid idea. Anyway, everybody have a good Thursday night. Man, it's gonna be hot a lot of places. Take it easy on yourself. And you know, if you see somebody broken down and it's like 187 degrees outside, if you can, if it's safe to do so, you might want to check, especially if they got their hood, you know, up. You might want to check if they have any air conditioning or, you know, like water. You know, I used to carry water in my car when I lived in Arizona because it's just so freaking hot that people get in over their head with the summer heat. And now that it's spreading to places where, you know, in years past it wasn't as hot, it could easily take somebody by surprise that's unprepared. So anyway, stay hydrated, stay safe, and yeah, that's about it for today. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you soon. Bye.